Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Castleberry. I'm here with
Austin Rowland.
Austin Rowland. What we wanted to talk about today was a topic we've had a lot of questions about. I've gotten quite often, a lot less from our clients, but a lot more from people I know and some people who we kind of work with on a consulting basis. But the question of what to expect from a financial planner, kind of what is financial planning and what we think the bare minimums of financial planning are. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about today is the overarching ideas. When you go to meet with an advisor or someone that calls themselves a financial advisor or calls themselves a financial planner, what should you be expecting to get? Because I think we're one of the rare industries where the product is very opaque.
Right.
So you go to a carpenter, you're expecting to get a piece of something done. You go to a builder, you're expecting to get a house. You go to a car salesman, you're expecting to get a car. Even if you go to an attorney, you're expecting either to close a legal issue, to come out with a trust or a will. Mm-hmm. When it's a financial plan, the whole idea of what a financial plan is, I think varies so much depending on who you talk to. It becomes something that is really hard to define in our industry, and I think that is a very sad state of where our industry is at. But that's where I want to come to. So I want to start off, Austin, with when you think of a financial plan, what comes to mind? And I'm going to start it off kind of asking you the question: what would you consider is not a financial plan that people in our industry tend to tout as financial planning?
So a financial plan is not, off the top of my head, a singular strategy in one area of your financial life. So it's not just having an investment account. Mm-hmm. It's not having an insurance policy, even the right insurance policy.
Yeah. It's
none of those things together. Mm-hmm. Necessarily. It's kind of where they all interact. Mm-hmm. And if you think about planning a vacation is a plan. You know, you have to think about how you're going to get there. You have to think about what you're going to do when you're there. You have to think about what you're going to eat. You're going to have to think about how long you're going to stay, who all is going to come.
Who's going to watch your kids.
Right. So a vacation is not the road trip down or the flight. That's not a vacation.
That's a part of it.
Yeah, it's a part of it. Mm-hmm. It's not the meal that you have on Thursday night. It's not the thing you do on Wednesday afternoon. It's all of it. Yeah. It's all of it together.
That's actually, I think, a really good analog, because you don't go to a why did I forget the name of that person? Travel planner?
Travel agent.
Travel agent.
Right.
You don't go to a travel agent and say, hey, I want to plan a vacation, and they come back to you and say, hey, I booked your flight to Tahiti.
Right.
And they're like, have fun. And you're like, all right, well, where am I staying in Tahiti? And they're like, oh no, I'm a travel agent. I booked your flight. What else do you want from me?
I think the flight analogy and your investment portfolio are great. Mm-hmm. An analogy. If you think about, a lot of people are going to investment advisors or travel agents, and they're trying to plan a vacation, and they're coming away with a flight, and they think that
they have a whole vacation
go.
plan. Because again, they've never, everyone's taken a vacation, hopefully. If not, take a vacation. It's worth it.
Right.
Even if it's just a staycation where you're just having to plan, hey, where am I getting takeout for lunch? But I think that's what frustrates me the most. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to do this is I've talked to so many people that are like, oh yeah, I have a financial advisor. And I'm like, okay, cool. What's your plan? And they're like, well, I save $500 a month into a Roth IRA. And I'm like, all right, cool. That's your flight. What's your plan? And they're like, I save $500 into a Roth IRA. I'm like, all right, cool. Again,
that's good. That's great. That's a good thing.
What's your flight? What's your plan? And they're like, Andrew, I feel like you're asking me a question that I don't know how to answer, but I save 500, and then they get frustrated. Like, I save 500 into a Roth IRA. This guy is like, I save it. That's what I do. And I feel like it's like one of those movie scenes where you're just seeing Will Ferrell go like, what do you want from me? But what we see really often is you'll see people tout, oh, well, we'll give you income security, and there'll be a annuity policy. It's like, oh, well, we guaranteed your income in retirement. That is what I taped ahead of the show for that not to happen. Don't use Scotch tape on TVs. But I secured income from an annuity. That is my retirement plan. I'm like, that's not a financial plan.
That is a
part of it.
piece.
Yeah, you are securing income. In the investment aspect, it's, well, I saved into a Roth IRA, I saved into a 401k, I did my 15%, Dave Ramsey says, or I did my 20%, the money guy says, or I did XYZ that Clark Howard says. And again, that is a piece, but that investment portfolio or that insurance policy, like you said, and not getting into the merits of which one of those is better or worse, but that is only a small piece. So what we have kind of done is built out what we would consider an outline of, there's a set bare minimum of questions, I think, that you need to be able to answer to call something a financial plan. If you can't answer those, it doesn't mean they're not part of your financial retirement plan, but they are a part. So like your Roth IRA, for what that guy was talking about, was his investment portfolio, which is a potential portion of his retirement plan strategy. But this is what I put together. So first question, I think, is the most obvious that you have to ask, but when do you plan to retire?
Yeah, this is an important one. It's a very important one because it determines the time horizon that you have to save and invest and plan, and also the time horizon that you're planning and investing and saving for. So are you going to be, are you going to retire for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? There's a popular gentleman on LinkedIn who he was a Facebook executive, and he is technically retired right now. He's part of the FIRE movement. He's a younger, probably 30s, 40s. So his retirement's going to look a lot different than, let's say, the traditional 60s, early 60s, 65 retiree.
Yeah.
So when you plan to retire is a very important question. You don't have to have it perfect. There's a little bit of flexibility here because if you plan really well, maybe you retire at 62 instead of 65. But you at least need to know within this 5-year period or decade is when I'm anticipating on retiring.
And I mean, realistically, I think if you were paying someone potentially thousands of dollars a year to do financial advising or financial planning, this should be, I mean, out of all of these questions, this should
probably
be
the easiest.
The bare minimum. Like, go to your advisor and be like, hey, when do you have me retiring? And if you've been working with them for a while, that should be pretty easy because ideally they should already have a plan. Be like, oh yeah, let me pull that up real quick and on their computer and be like, oh yeah, I have you retiring at 62 in like December of 2027, and then starting to take distributions. Really easy. If they're like, oh well, like we have you saving, and then when you feel like retiring, that's not a thing. Like you don't feel your way into like, okay, I feel good.
We'll just keep doing the best we can, and whenever we, we'll see where we come out.
It really bothers me because this is the bare minimum of you should at least, to even be able to invest appropriately, you need to know the time horizon.
Yep.
You need to know the time horizon, one, on when you're going to need to start taking money out, but two, how long that money needs to last, which then gets to the next question, which I think is ultimately important and builds the next level. So you have the date. Now it's going to be, how much will you spend? So what are you actually looking to need to spend in retirement?
Yeah, I think this is one of the questions that even a lot of people who are very prepared and have done planning before aren't really ready to answer.
Yeah.
And it's not... we talk about core expenses when we're building a financial plan for somebody. We talk about core expenses because some expenses are going to change. If you have children and your children grow up and they move out and they go to college and they eventually get their own jobs and they're not living with you anymore, then that portion of your expenses are going to change. Yeah. Your mortgage is probably going to fall off at some point, maybe in before retirement or early retirement.
Property taxes might drop down and depending on where you live after 62 or 65.
Right.
So,
but there's a core amount of expenses that you and your spouse have, and that you're used to. It's what when you think about life and what you enjoy, there's an amount that allows you to do that regularly.
I always consider it like your natural level of spending. Like if you are not trying. You're not trying to save. You're not actively trying to build a project or something. There's a level where just like if you go through life on autopilot, you spend X. Some couples it's $4,500. Some couples it's $7,500. Some couples it's $1,500. It's not $1,500, $15,000. Some couples it's like $3,500. That's a big factor. And again, this is probably the one that I would argue has the most opaqueness to it,
Right.
because it's not like when you talk about financial planning and you talk about how much you spend, you have to do a certain level of tracking on a household level to know what that natural level of spending is, so that you can start to build that. And that's that core. So, but then on top of that, when you get into retirement, we also have to look at, all right, well, if you, let's say you're retiring at 60 and you've got potentially 30, 35 years. The amount of people I talk to that are stepping away at 60 are like, well, I just bought a new car. I'm not buying a new car. I'm like, that car's making it 30 years is utter baloney. That's not a real thing.
Right.
And I was like, so, all right, we realistically probably have 2, if not 3, maybe 4 car purchases in retirement. So we have to bake those in. Those are significant purchases too, depending on what you're looking at. So like,
Sure.
let's go mid-size SUV below. You're looking like 45,000, give or take. And then you have, all right, well, then it's home repair. It's 30 years too. You think that AC unit's going to last? Hot water heater's going to last? Do you think your appliances are going to last?
Do you
think that
need to
roof is gonna-
downsize? Do you need to change locations? Are you going to be in the same home?
Yeah. Do you have a master on the main? Do you have stairs you're not going to be able to get up to in 25 years? Are your kids in the middle of their careers in other states that are going to have grandkids that you want to be closer to? So like, there's a lot of things outside of just, well, I live on $5,000 a month net for my paycheck, so I just need $5,000 a month. So that's when it gets to like, if you look at that annuity side of our industry and you say, oh, well, I secured you $5,000 net a month in insurance policies, you're fine. You are fine until you have to buy a car. You're fine until you have to replace a hot water heater. You're fine until you want to move, and suddenly you need an additional like $30,000 in moving costs and XYZ. So like, that's something that when you're talking about spending, you really need your financial plan to be able to look at all of that, adjust those for inflation, and then provide variances in there. So how much will you spend? I think a lot of people think, oh, well, that's really easy, the same I spend now. That's really not the case. So this is the one I think I give the most leniency to advisors that I think aren't doing everything they should be doing it to call themselves planners, because it is a very difficult thing. But I often feel people just don't think, like, advisors are like, oh, I don't want to think about that because it's hard. And like, I'll just manage your
and
account.
it's lots of times it's hard. I mean, when we work with clients and we ask, what do your expenses look like? It's not that they have no idea or they just don't know, but
it's hard to navigate because so many one-offs come
it
up.
changes every single month.
Yeah.
It's hard to track. Like, if you don't have some sort of software or technological assistance and you're just trying to calculate it in a spreadsheet or even on paper.
You have 2 kids that bring you, like, that you have activities for every single night of the week, and you're like, dude, I don't have time. Like, I'm treading water to get through work emails and soccer practices and gymnastics and whatever it might be. Like, I know we've both talked about this before. We use Rocket Money as like a form of just easy tracking, but I really encourage, like, even if there's not a need to budget, tracking in any plan is a necessity,
right?
At least high level.
And I would even say tracking is more important than budgeting, because budgeting is prescriptive. It tells you what you should be doing when it comes to spending.
I like that word.
And tracking is descriptive. It tells you what you're actually doing. So you might have a budget and say, well, we probably should spend $250 a month on gas and $800 a month on groceries. And then you look at what you actually do and you spend $500 on gas and $1,200 on groceries.
Yeah. So next question. How much do you need to save? So this, and I kind of ordered these because you need to know the first one. Then you need to know the second one. You need to know both the first and the second one to be able to answer this one of how much do you need to save. And I'm going to preface this once we answer this of like a sub question in here of where does that savings need to take place? Because I know we've had a conversation over the last 2 weeks about not lumping everything into retirement accounts and being retirement poor in your like late 40s and 50s. So how much do you need to save? That's a huge one.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people think of a specific number, and that measurement's always going to move. So, you know, for somebody who's in their mid 20s or mid 30s, and you're thinking about, I think I need 1.5 or 2.5 million dollars, or $3 million, or $4 million.
Just $1 million gap. That's not a big deal.
Sure, yeah. But you know, I just need X number. Let's say it's $2 million. I think I can retire on that. Well, 10 years from now, that number is now completely irrelevant, as is your salary, which has changed drastically over the last 10 years, whether it just be because of wage inflation or also just career track.
Yeah.
So when you're 20 or you're 30 and you're making let's just say you're making $75,000 and you're saving 15% of your income. Well, then you're 45 or you're 55, and now you make $135,000 a year, and 15% of your income is different, and your lifestyle is different, and your expenses are different. So in terms of how much do I need saved, I don't think you can look towards an exact dollar amount. I think it's more the principle, which we see. You know, we mentioned Dave Ramsey's 15% or the Money Guys 25%. I think that a rhythm of saving investing is more important than knowing an exact number, but you still need to know that you have enough.
Yeah.
And so that's where it kind of gets a little bit hazy.
I see a lot of people get caught up on the exact number of like, I need this. And I think too, one of the things that makes that hard, like even if you were to just say, all right, let's assume that's an adjusted for inflation number. But if you get a market performance decade that's like a 2000 teens or a 90s or an 80s, and you hit that number at 55 when you were expecting to hit that number at 60, well, that number might work at 60, but when you add those 5 years on, 2 million might not be enough.
Right.
So like you might need 2.3 million if to do it at 55. So when it comes to something like that, like you also have to take into account just the variability of a possible return scenario. So when it comes to how much you need to save, I tend to like think of it kind of like you said is, all right, let's take the age you want to shoot for. Let's back in the expenses and say, all right, well, with what you need, we need a decent range. We need to be somewhere in this dollar amount. How much do you need to save to get into that dollar amount? And then kind of back it out from an expense standpoint. And it's usually not a number. I always say it's a rate. It's a saving rate where, hey, we need to do this. We need it to increase this amount. And we need to assume your cost of living does X, Y, Z, which again, that's something that needs to be adjusted on an annual basis based on your life expectancy, or not your life expectancy, but your lifestyle. And I don't think you can say, hey, let's get to 1 million and I'm done, because I do not think that works. Now, the second question, like the sub question to this is, where do you need to save? Because this is the next question of, all right, well, I have a 401k at work. I've heard Roth IRAs are cool. What are brokerage accounts? Under my mattress seems safe.
Right.
The jar in my backyard also seems relatively safe. Savings accounts are earning 4%. Like there's a lot of questions because, again, you see people that are just like, oh, I saved everything into like my credit union and I get 4%. Why should I take any risk? Blah, blah, blah. So like when you think of where you should save, what do you tend to walk through with people?
Yeah, I think some of it depends on phase of life. I think you should always be saving in a retirement account, even if the proportion of that percentage rate is changing. So maybe when you're younger, it's,
A little bit more. Yeah.
And then as you get older, let's say you're in your, the later stage of your career and you have kids that are in college and you've been saving in a retirement account for a really long time, but now, you have some other goals that are approaching, like college expenses or car purchases or and you need a little bit of access. You need a little bit more liquidity. You need a little bit more access to it, and you don't need it to be maybe exposed to as much risk. So I don't think there's necessarily a singular account or type of account that you need to be saving in. A lot of people come to us, and if they're Dave Ramsey fans, or even if they're just on the internet and they've heard anything about finance ever, they say, I need a Roth IRA. Yeah. It's like, well, yeah, probably.
Yeah, in most cases, like it's
sure.
Yeah, like Roth IRAs are pretty awesome.
Yeah, but just like investment diversification, tax diversification, or account type diversification is huge.
Diversification.
Yeah. So the kind of account you have within retirement, whether it's a pre-tax account or a Roth or post-tax account, or if it's not a retirement account and it's a brokerage account, or it is a savings account, a lot of that depends on what you've already done. So if you spend a lot of your early career saving in retirement, but now you can't buy a house because you don't have any liquidity,
or you can't redo your deck,
right?
Whatever.
Then you probably need to adjust a percentage or just a portion of where you're saving so that you have more access to it.
And that's where I think it's really important, because a lot of people go into financial planning thinking it is only about retirement. And that's where we try and break down at least I kind of break it down to like short-term, mid-term, long-term. So like we want to make sure retirement planning is sound, which again is going to be Roth IRAs, 401ks, whatever. Then it becomes, all right, well, what's your 10-year goal? What's your 15-year goal? What's your 5-year goal at that point? And we need to look at, all right, well, if you are at a 10-year goal where you know your kids are going to start college in 10 to 15 years, do you want to start saving into a college specific account? If you know, hey, I want to remodel, or my retirement's pretty set if I do like 10% into my 401k, max out my Roth IRA, but I still have additional savings, let's start looking at a brokerage. So it really starts coming down to, once you know retirement's good, you got to start looking at goal specific, and that will change as you get older and your life changes. So that's a really important one as well, which leads into the last one is, once you're able to answer all of these other questions of, all right, well, I know when I'm retiring, I know when I'm going to step away from work, I know how much I spend, I know where I need to save and how I need to save. Now, how do I invest that money? And this is the question that is a whole heck of a lot harder. But this is the question most people only focus on.
Right.
Like most planners or advisors, they skip 1 through 3 and say, all right, well, let me talk about something that you were unfamiliar with because it makes me feel really smart to be able to talk about something that like everyone's like, oh, well, how do you understand the market or blah, blah, blah. When I would argue this is the last thing. Like this is important, but this is the last thing you need to be asking, because this is the thing that you have the least control over as far as how markets return. And this is the thing where like you can set it up and just let it do the work for you and let that investment grow. But how you should invest your money should not be the first priority in that plan. It's a valuable part of it. It's like 25%, and it's far for breaking 4 questions down. But it's the 4th question, and it's the 4th question specifically.
Right.
So,
I think a lot of people may be surprised to hear this, but a risk tolerance questionnaire and your age are actually not the only 2 things you need to figure out how you should be invested. And those 2 things, they can be helpful, they're important, but the reason that we went through the first 3 questions first is because they tend to actually contribute far more to how you should be invested than anything else. A lot of people, prospects or friends or just people that we meet, and you say, hey, I'm a financial planner. They'll
what
ask,
do you think about
what are your
NVIDIA?
returns? Yeah. What are your returns on an annual basis? My guy is doing this. And it's like, well,
cool.
Or how should I be invested? Or I have this brokerage account, or I have a 529 for my daughter, or I have my 401k. Can you look at the portfolio? And, the type of account, the time horizon, the risk required, which is something that we mention a lot. Those things determine how you should be invested far more than how old you are even. And I know that sounds like, well, I think there is a natural and, good wisdom about the older you get becoming a little bit more conservative, because odds are you're going to retire.
And I think, but the argument is that's because you're getting closer to retirement and you need stability for income. So again, that is also very dependent on
when you're retiring.
That's very different if you're a fire person and you're just going to start taking income at 45.
Right.
So it's...
And did you start saving when you were younger? Are you trying to catch up a little bit later in life?
How much risk does your plan need to be successful? How much are you comfortable with? Because there's one thing too, is like I might be like, oh, well, you need to be an 8 out of 10 because you're playing catch up. But if you're an 8 out of 10 and you're going to move to cash as soon as you get any market volatility, it negates any benefit. So it's also finding that balance of, all right, what are you comfortable with?
Right.
And then like, I don't want to take away the merits of like good sound investing, being kind of proactive on it, and taking into account a solid philosophy matters. You can't just blindly throw a dart at a board and say, hey, I'm going to pick this. There is a lot of risk involved, and this is something that takes a lot of time, and it is something that we spend a lot of time on. But I think it is dramatically oversold as this is the primary thing. And I think it's because people can measure this. It's like you can look at your advisor and be like, all right, well, the market did 20%. My advisor did 18%. And that is something that you can numerically be like, all right, I did this, my account grew by this much, and my advisor was here based on their benchmarks, whatever. Right. You can't necessarily put a like score on a plan. You can put a dollar value on a plan, but it is very intangible to see what that plan did for you. Like I always use an example. I ran into someone the other day, like early 30s person. They had a Roth 401k and a 401k. They were doing everything into the 401k. We shifted like 5% of the 15% they're putting in into the Roth because they need to do the pre-tax gets matched. It was a little bit weird of a plan, but that 5% shift doesn't change the amount they're saving, doesn't change the way they're invested, doesn't change their retirement date, but that little shift saved them like $300,000 over the course of their retirement in taxes paid, just cause that money from their 30s grows tax free. So it's like little things like that where what seems like a really small decision in a plan or a really little thing when it comes to where should you be saving your money have huge impacts. But that is not an easy thing to see. So people are like, well, how good is your planner? Your planner is good based on their performance alone, not on how efficient and effective that plan is.
Right.
And that is and I think that's something where it's just natural. Like everything is built off some sort of score in our lives. Like you have I can tell how good this person is by what they do.
Sure.
But a lot of times I think the planner gets marketed based on their portfolio performance, and that's what they push. Also, the planner probably gets paid off of portfolio management too in a lot of ways, which is our industry, and it's not a bad thing, but that kind of correlates to that's what they're going to focus on. So I think you get a lot of advisors and a lot of planners out there that either make commissions off their investments, make AUM fees off their investments, whatever, and they say, all right, well, since that's how I get paid, that's what the client measures me by, that's the most important thing. And what they rob of their clients is the ability to take the time, build a well thought out plan, actually provide what they say their title is going to provide, and make sure they're doing a solid fiduciary duty to their clients. And instead they're just saying, oh, well, this is how you pay me, this is what we're watching, this is what we're going to spend 65% of the meeting talking about, rather than building off of those first three questions. So
just to point out, the trend that we've already been following, once you answer the, first, second, third question, and you look at question number 4, how should you invest your money? After answering the first 3, you have a better idea. So if it's a 529 for your daughter and she's going to college in 10 years, that affects how you're invested. If it's a brokerage account for the earlier portion of your retirement, or a Roth IRA for the later portion of your retirement, I mean, there's a big gap. If you retire let's say you retire at 58 and you're living off your brokerage account for the first several years, but you also have pre-tax retirement accounts and Roth retirement accounts.
That Roth might not be touched until you're
not going to use it for 30.
You have a lot longer time horizon. Everything doesn't have to be prepared for cashing out day one of retirement.
Yes. So a lot of those questions are going to answer how you should invest your money. And I think, Andrew, you've already touched on this, but this might sound kind of in-depth. This is the bare necessities of a financial plan.
So these are the 4 questions that if you go to your advisor and you say, hey, I have 4 questions for you, and they're like, shoot, I'm probably 9 out of 10 times I'm like, all right, did I invest internationally? Did I do this? Like it's going to be like, they're preparing for those. And it's like, all right, when do I need to retire? How much do you have me spending in retirement? What spending do you have baked into my retirement? How much am I saving? Is that getting me there? And then how am I invested? Like if they can answer those 4 questions should lead to a nice hour and a half long conversation of building and reviewing a plan. And then you should have I always argue, like you should have a deliverable, whether it's a printed out document that's 60 pages long, whether it's a portal, you should be able to have a deliverable and say, hey, this is what I have, or this is what I can log into. It should not be, you know what, we're doing XYZ, just keep saving, you'll be fine, because that's not a thing. You can't just, again.
It's also, you can't go back and, one of the things that we do is we set almost like benchmarks in our plans so that every single year we can go back, or every 6 months or however long, we can go back and look at the previous plan and say, all right,
was last year.
This is where it was. This is how it looks. Things have changed a little bit. And so we're going to adjust it. And again, if you can answer these 4 questions, odds are if you're monitoring it and keeping it to where you have the answers to those 4 questions, then you're going to be fine. But then financial planning is also, we call it nitpicking, but it's just looking for small little efficiencies or things that we can optimize.
If you can answer all those 4 questions and you are solid and you're like, hey, I've answered all 4 of these, it's good to go. Then we can get into, all right, well, how can we make your taxation slightly lower through retirement? How can we maximize some timing issues? Can we do these other strategies that, again, are going to be window dressing to a already sound plan, if you will, not the plan itself. Like the idea of like, hell, well, we do Roth conversions. Whoopee. So you have a plane ticket and 1 restaurant. that you booked. That's still not the plan.
Right.
That is a restaurant you're going to on Wednesday, still not the entire vacation. The last thing I want to hit on is why we take it so seriously and why it bothers us so much when we hear comments like, well, I have a planner, and then you have to, all right, well, cool, like, what's your plan? And there's no answer. And also, I'll let you answer because I know I have an answer, and I know it always gets me super riled up, more so than I normally am. But why do you look at planning and say, all right, it's something that we do take seriously?
Well, I think we've met. I don't know how many plans we've built as a firm. Hundreds of plans. We've met with hundreds and hundreds of people.
Easy hundreds. Probably getting close to a comma.
Right. We might be close to 1,000 plans built. And one of the things that we see very often from either clients who have been around for a while, or maybe I think it's oftentimes it's new clients, is just this peace of mind and sense of relief that they knew that they probably needed to have some sort of answer like the ones we've just discussed, but they didn't quite know what they didn't know until they had a plan built and realized, oh, I was slightly off track here, or I was making an assumption here that I wasn't really, I wasn't cognizant that I was making that assumption, but I was. And when they figure out that, there is a plan that they need to have created, they kind of wake up, and it's their personal life. For us, it's what we do for work, but we also have plans. We are people who are trying to do things in our own personal life. And so when we see somebody who's an advisor or they call themselves a financial planner, and we meet with one of their clients who's a prospective client for us, or maybe it's a friend or a family member, and they say, yeah, I have a financial plan, and they look really confident about what they say is their financial plan, and then you come to realize that they really don't have a plan, it just makes you a little bit frustrated, almost like if you heard a doctor who, gave malpractice advice, or, did a surgery, but only did a fourth of the surgery.
Or someone got sold a lemon car, and you're just like, and they knew that it was a lemon car or something like that. But it's one thing I do think is our industry is getting better and better about planning being front and center. I think a lot of push has been pushed. So I think it's getting, thankfully, less and less common. But one thing that it always gets me is just, I kind of view it as, in a lot of jobs, and I don't mean to sound this condescending, my job's more important than everyone else, but deep down inside, I low-key feel like my job's really important. But there's jobs where the stakes are higher, like a fireman, stakes super high, policeman, stakes super high, surgeon, stakes are super high. There's jobs where stakes are life or death every day, and it's really, really, really intense. And there's other jobs where it's all right, well, if I make a mistake, this multinational organization is a fraction of a fraction percent slightly less profitable, and I can fix it tomorrow, and stakes are a lot lower, and it's just depending on your job. And what I the way I view financial planning is if I make a mistake in someone's plan, what the reality of that mistake means to me is it's a mistake, but what it means to that client is they get to 78, they're no longer marketable to the workforce in any way, shape, or form because they're 78. And now I didn't account for inflation correctly, or I didn't take into account car purchases, or I didn't take into account what their actual spending was because I never bothered to ask any of those questions. I was just high level, let's get money invested, let's earn, save. And suddenly they're out of money. It's just Social Security. They're looking at Medicare. They're looking at annual expenses, and they can't cover it. Their brokerage accounts dry, their IRAs dried out, and now you just have potentially another 10 years of, all right, well, we were used to this lifestyle, and because, Andrew, you did a bad job, I'm having to suffer for 10 years. You're not having to suffer.
Right.
I'm having to suffer. And that's the way I view it. It's all right, if you call yourself a financial planner and you say you have a fiduciary duty, you are taking on the responsibility not just of saying, hey, well, I want to make sure these guys have a great return and I deliver a great product, but the result of that product, that plan, needs to be them stepping into retirement knowing you have done every single thing in your power to make sure, come heck or high water, they are secure and they have the ability to retire and comfortably make it until death with meeting the needs and the requirements of their life. And if you have not done that, I don't think you should be calling yourself a financial planner, because I don't think you're taking the responsibility of that with where you need. And again, there's a lot of different ways you can get to that. I'm not saying one industry is worse or one industry is worse. It's you need to be able to have it to where it's not just a piece that you're focusing on, but you have a full plan. And that's why that's what keeps me up at night is, all right, if I messed up this plan, this guy's about to step away. He thinks he's okay. But in 5 years, if I didn't account for X, Y, Z, or I never asked enough questions, or I was too timid to ask questions, or I didn't challenge them, I'm like, hey guys, you have to work one more year. And that's not an easy thing to do. If someone looks at it, comes in and says,
easy.
hey, I'm retiring next year, and you got to be like, no, you're not. Like you can, but it's not going to work. It's not a successful plan. Like you got to die by 83 if you're going to retire next year.
It's always a fun conversation.
That's what I think of, and that's why I take it so seriously, because I am terrified of what the side effects are of my negligence.
Right.
And that's what really, really bothers me and that's what riles me up when I hear things, because it's like, it's not just that that's a bad product they're giving to their client. It's, to me, that planner is being grossly negligent with what power and authority they have. And allowing that person to think they are safe, and they're not.
Right.
Yeah.
And the whole lens of this conversation has been predominantly through comparing an advisor to the expectation of what should your plan look like, or do you even have a plan?
Yeah.
But this is also just a great lineup of questions if you work primarily for yourself as your own planner. I mean, we have a lot of folks who we've met with previously,
and I've seen a lot of
just friends and family
that could answer all of these questions themselves.
There's a lot of people who don't need a planner, but if you're on the fence and you're wondering, should I be searching or looking for a financial planner or not? If you can answer these 4 questions with a high level of clarity, or you can't, I think that's at least a good starting point.
And even like I've had a guy come in a few years ago. I mean, spreadsheet was immaculate, man. It was superb. I mean, he had done everything. Like essentially, I imagine the back end of our software looks like was his Excel spreadsheet. I mean, he spent probably years developing this thing. And just wanted to walk through, like, hey, what am I missing? We went through, he had everything right. It was like 2 or 3 things he had not put inflation adjustments on that actually matter. It was like cars and I think home repairs. He didn't adjust for inflation. And we just made a small change, but it made enough of a difference to where he ended up pushing his savings up like 1% a year, and that fixed it. So it was a really small change, and would he have probably been fine? He would have just ended up buying cheaper cars anyways, but like you don't want to have to do that.
Right.
So it's like, if you don't need a planner, that's great. If you just want someone to say, hey, one off, just like someone
Double
give
check.
me another set
Check
of
my
eyes
work
here, and just say that. And I mean, perfect. Like find a planner that can do that. But if you go to do hey, check my work, and they're like, oh, well, everything looks good. What you really need to do is invest a little bit differently.
That I have that you don't have.
Or change your allocation to where like, oh, well, you're in a target date fund. You could spread it out over here. And they make the whole focus on changing the investment allocation and not really talking through the plan. I'd say that's probably a red flag. Not that that's a bad thing inherently, but it's, again, not the most important thing. It shouldn't be the first question they're talking about. So. But no, well, that was probably longer than we intended it to be. Again.
Always is.
So thanks for listening. Please check out our other videos, and we hope you guys have a great day.
And Merry Christmas.